Black little girl gives her sandwich to a white homeless man. The next day, cops knock on her door in the small town of Morse Creek. Nestled between the rolling hills and far from the bustle of the big city, life was quiet, almost too quiet. The people of Morse Creek liked it that way. Most had grown up there, gone to school with the same people they now saw at the grocery store, and waved to every morning. But there was always an underlying tension in the town, one that wasn't spoken of openly. Race was a silent divider, and though the town pretended to be united, the unspoken lines were clear to those who lived there. Minus 1-year-old Maya Johnson was one of the few black children in the predominantly white town. She lived with her mother, Aaliyah, in a small house on the corner of Oak and Willow Street. Her father had passed away in an accident a few years ago, leaving Aaliyah to raise Maya alone. Despite the challenges, Aaliyah taught her daughter kindness, compassion, and the value of treating people as equals regardless of how they looked or where they came from. It was a chilly Thursday afternoon when Maya's life would change forever. On her way home from school, she noticed an old, white homeless man sitting on a bench outside the local library. His clothes were ragged, his face lined with years of hardship, and his eyes were tired, but he looked at her with a warmth that caught her attention. She stopped, clutching her lunchbox, which held a half-eaten peanut butter and jelly sandwich from earlier in the day. Something inside Maya told her to help him. "Hi, mister," she said in a soft voice, standing before him. The man looked at her, surprised by her kindness. "Hello, young lady," he replied, his voice raspy but gentle. "What brings you to an old man like me?" Maya smiled and opened her lunchbox, pulling out the sandwich. "You look hungry," she said, handing it to him. "You can have this." The man hesitated, his eyes misting over as he took the sandwich from her small hands. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a kind soul, little one." Maya watched as the man took a bite of the sandwich, and for the first time in what felt like ages, a smile appeared on his face. She stayed for a few moments, talking to him about school and the books she liked to read, before heading home, feeling a warmth in her heart. It was a small gesture, but to her, it felt like the right thing to do. Little did Maya know, that single act of kindness would set off a chain of events she could never have imagined. The next day, the next morning, Maya went to school as usual, her mind still on the homeless man she had helped. She wondered where he slept, whether he had a family, and if he would be okay. But as the school day went on, her thoughts were pulled back to her friends and the usual school activities. That afternoon, when she arrived home, something was different. A black and white police cruiser was parked in front of her house, and 2 officers were standing on the porch, talking to her mother. Aaliyah looked confused, her arms crossed as she listened to the cops. Maya's heart raced as she walked up the steps, sensing something was wrong. One of the officers, a tall man with cold blue eyes, turned to look at Maya as she approached. His face was unreadable.
Before continuing with the story, please subscribe to the channel. Support your people. We will be strong if we are loyal to each other.
But there was something unsettling in the way he stared at her. "Mum, this is your daughter, right?" the officer asked Aaliyah, though his eyes never left Maya. "Yes, this is Maya," Aaliyah answered, her voice laced with concern. "What's this about? Why are the police here?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he bent down to Maya's eye level, his gaze intense. "Maya," he said in a tone that felt more like an interrogation than a friendly question. "Did you give a sandwich to a man yesterday? A homeless man?" Maya blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected anyone to know about that. "Yes," she replied softly. "Why?" The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. "That man you gave the sandwich to, he's in trouble. Big trouble." Maya's stomach flipped. "What do you mean?" "I was just trying to help him. He was hungry." Aaliyah stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. What kind of trouble could a homeless man be in that involves my little girl. The second officer, a woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, glanced at her partner before answering. The man your daughter helped is wanted for questioning in a series of robberies around town. He's a suspect. Maya's eyes widened. But he didn't do anything. He was just sitting there. He seemed nice. The male officer stood up, his expression hardening. We don't know that, little girl. He's been seen around the areas where the crimes took place. It's best if we come inside and ask you a few more questions. Aliya's protective instincts kicked in. You're not questioning my daughter without me being present. I don't care what this is about. She's a child, and she was only trying to help someone in need. The officers exchanged looks, the tension thick in the air. We're just doing our job, ma'am, the woman officer said. It's routine. Reluctantly, Aliya allowed them inside, and the questioning continued. Maya explained how she had met the man, how he seemed harmless, and how she only wanted to give him something to eat. But the officers were not satisfied with her answers. They pressed her for more details, asking if the man had told her anything strange or if she had seen him do anything suspicious. By the time they left, Aliya was furious. This is ridiculous, she fumed after closing the door. They're treating you like a criminal for showing kindness. Maya sat quietly, unsure of what to think. Had she really done something wrong? The man had been so kind, so grateful. She couldn't believe he could be involved in anything bad. But the way the officers had looked at her made her feel like she was guilty of something. The unfolding mystery, the next few days were filled with unease. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The police hadn't returned, but the tension between the town's white residents and its few black families seemed to grow with each passing day. Maya overheard her mother on the phone, talking to one of her friends about how people had started looking at them differently, more suspiciously. Ever since the police came, Aliya said in a low voice, people are treating us like criminals, like we had something to do with those robberies. I don't like it. Maya stayed in her room, trying to focus on her homework.
Before continuing with the story, please subscribe to the channel. Support your people. We will be strong if we are loyal to each other.
But her thoughts kept drifting back to the homeless man. What if he was in trouble? What if the police had arrested him? And it was all because she gave him that sandwich. She felt guilty, even though she didn't fully understand why. One evening, as the sun set over Morse Creek, there was a knock on the door. Aliya, expecting a neighbor, answered it casually. But when she saw who stood on the porch, her heart sank. It was the two officers again. What now? Aliya demanded, her patience wearing thin. I thought we were done with this. The male officer stepped forward, his face grim. Ma'am, we need to talk to you and your daughter. There's been a new development. New developments. Aliya's heart raced as the officers stepped into the house once again. Maya, sitting quietly on the living room couch, looked up, fear flickering in her eyes. She hadn't seen the homeless man since that day, but she had thought about him constantly. And now, the police were back. What do you mean by new developments? Aliya asked sharply, crossing her arms defensively. The male officer cleared his throat, his face grim. We found the man your daughter helped. We have reason to believe that he's connected to the recent crimes in town. Maya sat up, her voice trembling. But he didn't seem like a bad person. I just gave him a sandwich, that's all. The female officer glanced at her partner before turning to Aliya and Maya. We know that, Maya. But something else happened last night. After we questioned some witnesses, we discovered that the man's been staying near the old train station on the outskirts of town. We went there to look for him. Aliya narrowed her eyes. And what does this have to do with my daughter? The male officer stepped closer, lowering his voice as if he was about to deliver the most shocking news of all. We found something in his belongings, something that has your address on it. Aliya's face drained of color. What do you mean? The officer reached into his jacket pockets and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. This was found in the man's coat. Your address was written on it. We don't know why yet, but we're looking into it. Maya's mouth fell open in disbelief. My address? Why would he have that? That's what we're trying to figure out. The female officer
Thank you for
replied,
watching.
her
Leave your
tone a
opinions
little
on this
softer than her
story in the
partner's.
comments.
It could
As
be
well,
nothing,
you can watch
or
our
it
other
could mean
videos.
something more. We need to ask some more questions. Aliyah felt the hairs on her arms stand up. Why would a homeless man, a stranger, have their home address? Suddenly, a new layer of fear gripped her. Was her daughter in danger? I don't understand, Aliyah said, shaking her head. This doesn't make any sense. The male officer sighed, his eyes narrowing. Look, we know this is hard to believe, but we need to be cautious. This man might not be who you think he is. He might have been following your daughter, or worse, he could be planning something. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but he was nice. He didn't seem dangerous. You're just a kid, the officer snapped, before regaining his composure. Kids don't always see the danger. We're trying to protect you. Aliyah stepped between her daughter and the officers, her voice firm. I want to know what you plan to do about this. You can't just come here, scare my daughter, and leave us with more questions than answers. The female officer nodded sympathetically. We're increasing patrols in this area, and we'll keep an eye out for anything suspicious. But if you see or hear anything out of the ordinary, you need to let us know immediately. Aliyah nodded, but the pit in her stomach remained. As the officers left, she locked the door behind them, a wave of unease settling over the house. The stranger returns later that night, long after Maya had gone to bed. Aliyah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the piece of paper the officers had left with her. The sight of her address scrawled in jagged handwriting sent shivers down her spine. She couldn't sleep. The thought of a stranger lurking, perhaps watching, filled her with dread. Just as she was about to head upstairs to bed, a soft knock echoed from the front door. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze, her mind racing. Who could it be at this hour? The police, a neighbor, or worse, someone dangerous. Slowly, Aliyah crept toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. She peered through the peephole, but the sight on the other side sent her heart into overdrive. It was him, the homeless man, disheveled and dirty, stood on her porch, his eyes filled with desperation. Aliyah's blood ran cold. He had found their house. But how? And why? For a moment, she considered calling the police, but something in the man's eyes stopped her. He didn't look violent. He looked scared. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the door. Against her better judgment, she unlocked it and cracked it open. What are you doing here? She whispered harshly, her voice laced with fear. The man looked down at his feet, his hands shaking as he spoke. I didn't mean to scare you, or your daughter. He paused, swallowing hard. I'm in trouble. They're after me. Aliyah's eyes narrowed. Who's after you? The police. The man shook his head furiously. No, not the police. It's bigger than that. You don't understand. They framed me. I didn't do anything. Aliyah's heart pounded in her chest. She had no reason to trust this man, no reason to believe his story, but there was something in his voice, a raw fear that felt too real to ignore. I just want to know why you had our address, she demanded. Why were you watching my daughter? The man's eyes widened in horror. No, you've got it all wrong. I wasn't watching her. I was trying to protect her. Aliyah blinked, confused. Protect her? From what? The man took a deep breath, his voice trembling. From them, the people who framed me. They'll come after her next. Aliyah stepped back, her mind racing. This couldn't be real. It sounded like some sort of conspiracy theory, something straight out of a movie. But the fear in the man's eyes was undeniable. I don't know who to believe, Aliyah whispered. I'm telling the truth, the man insisted, his voice growing more desperate. They framed me for those robberies, and now they're trying to pin it on me. But it's not just about money, it's about control. They're after people like me, people who know too much. Aliyah shook her head, trying to make sense of his words. And what does this have to do with my daughter? The man's voice dropped to a whisper. She saw something that day. Something she wasn't supposed to see. Aliya's blood ran cold. What do you mean? She doesn't know it yet. The man continued. But she saw someone. Someone connected to the people who are after me. They'll come for her if they think she can identify them. Aliya's heart raced. This was too much, too fast. She didn't know what to believe. But one thing was clear: if what he said was true, Mayar could be in danger. I need to go, the man said suddenly, his eyes darting toward the street. They're watching. But please, just be careful. They'll come. Before Aliya could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the night, leaving her standing in the doorway, her mind swirling with questions and fear. The threat arrives the next morning. Aliya woke up early, her mind still racing from the encounter with the homeless man. She didn't tell Maya about what had happened, not wanting to scare her. But the tension in the air was palpable. As the day wore on, Aliya noticed something strange. A black SUV had parked across the street from their house, and two men sat inside, watching. She had seen the car earlier, but now it was clear they were watching her. Her heart pounded. Was the homeless man right? Were these the people he had warned her about? Unable to shake the feeling of dread, Aliya decided to call the police. She didn't trust the man completely, but something was off. When she explained the situation to the dispatcher, they promised to send an officer. But as the minutes ticked by, the SUV remained, its presence looming over their house like a dark cloud. Just as Aliya was about to grab her phone again, a knock on the door made her jump. She opened it cautiously, expecting to see the police. But instead, two men in dark suits stood on her porch, their expressions cold and serious. "Mrs. Johnson," one of them said smoothly, his voice unnervingly calm. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." Aliya's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say we're here to help you. You've had some strange visitors lately, haven't you?" Her heart pounded in her chest. How did they know? Before she could answer, the second man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "It would be in your best interest to cooperate. We wouldn't want anything to happen to your daughter. Now, would we?"
This is the end of the first part of this fascinating story. If you want to continue the story, write in the comments and I will publish the second part.